A millionaire disguised herself as a cleaning lady, letting her maid run her company for the day. The next morning, she was left speechless by the chaos her maid had caused in her absence. The shrill beep of the alarm clock sliced through the quiet of the small Bronx apartment, dragging Emma from her restless sleep. Reluctantly, she opened her tired brown eyes, their dark circles betraying her exhaustion. As she sat up, her eyes landed on a stack of medical bills on the bedside table. A heavy sigh escaped her lips as her chest tightened with worry. How am I ever going to cover my mother's medical expenses? She thought, if only I'd studied more, gotten a better job. Maybe if I work extra hours. Her spiraling thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a cough coming from the next room. Quickly, she stood, knowing her mother would need her morning meds. In the small kitchen, Emma made herself a strong cup of coffee, mentally preparing for the day ahead. The bitter aroma filled the space, mixing with the musty scent of the old building's worn walls. As she grasped the cup, her hands shook slightly, a reflection of the sleepless nights and long workdays that had drained her. Today I have to clean Mrs. Lewis' penthouse. Maybe if I do an outstanding job, she'll leave me a nice tip, Emma thought. Please let her be in a good mood today. She closed her eyes for a brief moment of vulnerability before quickly masking it with her usual composure. Emma quietly entered her mother's room, carrying a tray with coffee and medicine. Her mother, frail and pale, offered a weak smile upon seeing her. "Good morning, my dear," she whispered hoarsely. Emma sat beside her, helping her mother sit up. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Her mother coughed softly before replying, "Better, thanks to you, my dear." "I don't know what I'd do without you," her mother added, her words filled with affection, but they weighed heavily on Emma's heart as she helped her with breakfast. Emma fought against the overwhelming wave of guilt and helplessness that threatened to drown her. Her eyes drifted around the room, pausing on the photos of happier times adorning the peeling walls. One in particular caught her attention. It was a picture of her and her mother, smiling in front of their old flower shop before the illness and the mounting debt. Emma swallowed hard, forcing a smile as she looked at her mother. "Do you remember that day, Mom, when we won that award for the best floral arrangement in the neighborhood?" Emma asked. Her mother nodded, her eyes lighting up with the memory. "Yes, my dear. We were happy, weren't we? But don't worry. Better days will come. You have feel?" Emma grasped her mother's hand, trying to hold on to the hope her mother offered, even if she herself couldn't quite share it. The shrill ring of the phone interrupted the quiet moment, making Emma jump. She hurried to answer, her heart pounding in her chest, filled with an unshakable sense of dread. The voice on the other end was professional but cold, its words striking Emma like a physical blow. "Miss Smith, this is St. Mary's Hospital. We need you to come in urgently. Your mother's test results are in, and it's best we discuss them in person." The world seemed to tilt as Emma felt her legs weaken. "What happened? Please tell me," she begged, her voice barely a whisper. The nurse hesitated before speaking again. "Your mother needs surgery, Miss Smith. It's an expensive but necessary procedure." The words reverberated in Emma's mind, mixing with her frantic thoughts. "How will I ever pay for this? What can I do? My God, I can't lose my mother." She glanced at the room where her mother lay, unaware of the life-altering news that had just landed in their laps. Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made up her mind. "I'll be there in an hour," she said firmly before hanging up. She didn't know how, but somehow, she would find a way. Across the city, the morning sunlight poured into the grand windows of the Lewis mansion, casting a warm glow over the breakfast room. Ava Lewis, impeccably dressed in a silk robe, sat at the marble table, her iPad glowing in her hands as she scrolled through troubling headlines about her cosmetics company. Each negative article made her stomach churn: declining sales, an animal testing scandal, plummeting stock prices. Ava paused for a moment, rubbing her temples. "How did we get here?" she thought. "I built this empire from the ground up, and now it's falling apart." She whispered to herself, staring at her reflection in the window as she tried to collect her thoughts. Ava lifted her coffee cup, the rich aroma mixing with the bitter taste in her mouth. Her gaze drifted to the gardens outside, perfect and pristine, a sharp contrast to the turmoil she was facing in her professional life. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant reminding her about the board meeting. Ava felt a wave of anxiety rush over her. They'll want my head in that meeting, she thought. But I'm not going down without a fight. This company is my life. The sound of footsteps broke her train of thought as Emma entered the room, quietly setting a tray of fresh fruit on the table. Ava barely acknowledged her, too absorbed in her thoughts. Emma placed the tray down and stood still for a moment, her gaze filled with concern as she studied her employer. Finally, Ava looked up, meeting her eyes. "Is something wrong, ma'am?" Emma asked gently. "You seem worried." "Nothing you need to worry about, Emma. It's just business," Ava replied, her voice softer than usual. Just then, a sharp ping came from her iPad, signaling the arrival of a new email. Ava frowned, recognizing the sender as the board of directors. A sense of dread settled over her as she opened the email and quickly skimmed through the contents. Her face drained of color as she read. The message was blunt and to the point. The board was considering removing her from the position of president of the company she had built from scratch. Each word seemed to strike her like a dagger to the heart. "They can't do this to me. This company is my legacy," she thought, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. She let the iPad fall onto the table with a sharp thud, the sound reverberating through the room. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Emma, still standing by the table, watched Ava with growing concern. The silence was shattered when Ava suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly across the marble floor. She walked to the window, her footsteps echoing in the quiet room. Emma hesitated, unsure whether to leave or offer comfort. "Ava, have you ever felt like your life is falling apart around you?" Emma asked softly. Ava asked calmly, her voice unexpectedly composed. Emma, caught off guard by such a personal question, hesitated. "Actually, I feel that way almost every day, ma'am," she admitted, her voice small. Ava turned to her with newfound intensity. "Tell me," she said softly but firmly. Surprised, Emma hesitated before sharing the overwhelming weight of her responsibilities. Her sick mother, the mounting medical bills, and her constant fear of not being able to provide the necessary care. Her words began to spill out faster, as though a dam had finally broken. Ava listened closely, her expression softening with each passing sentence. "It feels like I'm always running, but I'm never making any progress. Sometimes I wonder, if I just had a little more, maybe things would be different," Emma finished, her voice shaking. Ava nodded slowly, her lips curling into a sad smile. "And sometimes, I think my life would be so much easier if I had a simpler job without all the pressure of corporate responsibility," Emma added quietly. The two women locked eyes, sharing a brief but profound moment of mutual understanding. Ava returned to the table, picked up an apple, and turned it over in her hands as she thought. "It's funny how we always think the other person's life is easier," she murmured, half to herself. Emma nodded silently, her gaze fixed on her hands as they rested in her lap. "Ma'am, if I may ask, what happened? What did that email say?" Emma asked cautiously. Ava exhaled deeply, her shoulders slumping. "The board wants to remove me as president of the company I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. They want to take it all away from me," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The room fell silent as both women drifted into their own thoughts. Ava absent-mindedly bit into the apple, her gaze distant, lost in her own turmoil. Suddenly, she stood up straighter, a spark, perhaps of hope, or maybe something more reckless, flaring in her eyes. Emma watched, intrigued, as Ava began to pace back and forth, muttering to herself. "Emma, what if I told you I have an idea?" Ava turned toward her with a sudden urgency. "An idea that could solve both of our problems." Emma blinked, caught off guard. "What kind of idea, ma'am?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Ava's smile was a strange mixture of excitement and something darker. "A crazy idea, Emma. One that could change everything. I have a proposal for you. It might seem absurd at first, but I need you to hear me out," she said, her eyes alight with restrained excitement. Emma's heart raced, a blend of hope and uncertainty swelling in her chest. "What proposal, Mrs. Lewis?" Ava stepped forward, her voice lowering with a new intensity. She gestured for Emma to follow her into her private office, a space that exuded luxury with its mahogany furniture and bookshelves brimming with volumes. As they walked, Emma could feel her pulse quicken, a swirl of curiosity and apprehension settling in her stomach. Once inside, Ava closed the door and turned to face her housekeeper. The intensity in her eyes was like nothing Emma had seen before. "Emma," Ava began, her voice firm but tinged with vulnerability, "what I'm about to propose may sound insane, but I need you to listen until the end." Ava paused, taking a breath before continuing. "I propose that we switch lives for 24 hours. You'll take my place at the company while I step into your shoes to experience your life and responsibilities." Emma stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mrs. Lewis, this is impossible. How could I represent you? I don't know anything about running a company." Ava smiled, a mix of confidence and desperation in her expression. "You know more than you think, Emma. You've been observing and learning all these years without even realizing it." Ava began to pace, quickly outlining how Emma's unique perspective could help address the company's issues, while Ava would gain a deeper understanding of the challenges Emma faced daily. Emma listened in stunned silence, trying to absorb the audacious plan. Her eyes wandered around the room, taking in the stark contrast between the opulence of Ava's office and her own reality. "But Mrs. Lewis," Emma interjected, "what if I make a mistake? What if I ruin everything?" Ava stopped pacing and turned, locking eyes with Emma. "I trust you, Emma. More than that, I believe your perspective could be exactly what the company needs right now," she said with unwavering confidence. Ava then mentioned the generous bonus Emma would receive for agreeing to this unconventional arrangement. Emma's eyes widened at the amount, her mind immediately calculating how it could cover her mother's medical bills. A rush of hope mingled with the weight of the responsibility that would come with such a proposal. "It's a substantial sum, Emma. Enough to cover your mother's medical expenses and still leave some left over," Ava added, noticing the shift in Emma's expression. Emma swallowed hard, her mind spinning. I don't know what to say, Mrs. Lewis. This is such an unexpected proposal." The office fell into silence as Emma weighed the offer. Ava waited patiently, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. After what felt like an eternity, Emma exhaled deeply and nodded. "I accept, Mrs. Lewis," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Ava's face broke into a wide grin, a look of palpable relief washing over her. "Excellent, Emma. Don't worry. I'll give you all the instructions you need," she said, her energy renewed. She quickly moved to her desk, flipping through an agenda. Then she paused, her face turning slightly pale. "Oh, there's one more thing I forgot to mention," she said, looking at Emma with an apologetic expression. Emma felt her stomach drop. "What is it, Mrs. Lewis?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Ava gave her a rueful smile. "There's a crucial board meeting coming up. As my representative, you'll need to attend." Emma's face drained of color. "A board meeting? Mrs. Lewis, I don't know anything about corporate meetings. How could I possibly represent you?" Ava placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. "Calm down, Emma. I'll prepare you with all the information you need. Besides, your unique perspective might be exactly what we need to face the board." Emma took a shaky breath, trying to push past the panic rising in her chest. "What if I make a mistake? What if they don't think I'm worthy of this?" "Trust yourself, Emma," Ava said firmly. "You're more capable than you realize. Now, let's head to my dressing room." Ava turned to Emma, her voice calm but firm. "We need to get you ready to look and act like an executive." With that, she led Emma out of the office and toward her dressing room, signaling the start of her transformation. Emma's heart raced, her chest tight with uncertainty. She wasn't sure if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life or was about to step into an adventure she could never have imagined. Emma hesitantly stepped into Ava's luxurious dressing room, her eyes taking in the rows of high-end clothes and exquisite accessories. Ava immediately began sifting through the racks, pulling out items she deemed appropriate for the board meeting. Emma felt completely out of place, her hands sweating as she touched fabrics she had only ever seen in magazines or on TV. "Here, try this on," Ava said, handing her a perfectly tailored suit. "Remember, Emma, appearance is half the battle in this world. You need to exude confidence." Ava continued, her tone authoritative. Emma nodded, her voice barely audible as she muttered, "Confidence, right? Like I know what that even means in this context." As Emma changed behind the screen, Ava rattled off instructions about the company's current situation. Her voice was firm and fast, covering board decisions, ongoing projects, and expectations for the upcoming quarter. Emma tried to absorb it all, her mind working overtime to memorize every detail. She emerged from behind the screen, adjusting the blazer awkwardly. Ava gave her a critical look. "Remember, you are my personal representative. Keep your posture straight, your gaze steady. Don't let them intimidate you." Ava adjusted the collar of the blazer, her hands quick and practiced. Emma swallowed, her voice a little shaky. "What if they ask questions?" "I don't know how to answer, Mrs. Lewis." Ava picked up a pair of high heels from the table and handed them to Emma. "If you don't know the answer, don't make something up. Just say you'll check and get back to them. Show that you're willing to learn, but don't be submissive." Emma slipped the heels on, immediately feeling unsteady. She took a few tentative steps, struggling to adjust to the added height. "Now, about the meeting agenda," Ava continued, picking up a leather folder. "The main topic will be our new line of sustainable products. You need to emphasize our commitment to innovation and environmental responsibility." Emma nodded, her expression strained as she repeated to herself, "Sustainability, innovation, responsibility. Got it? But what if they ask about specific numbers?" Ava was about to answer when a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Ava's assistant, a young man in a well-tailored suit, rushed in, his face pale with concern. He stopped short upon seeing Emma in the executive attire, but quickly composed himself. "Mrs. Lewis, we have a problem. I've just received information about a potential scandal involving the company. The press is already looking into it," he said, his voice tense. Ava's face drained of color, and she exchanged a worried glance with Emma. "What kind of scandal?" Ava asked, her voice tight. The assistant hesitated, looking nervously at Emma. Ava made a quick gesture. "She can hear. Go ahead." He took a deep breath before continuing. "There are allegations of animal testing in our new product line. If this leaks, it could ruin our reputation and sabotage the launch of the sustainable line." Emma felt her heart race, panic bubbling up inside her. She turned to Ava, expecting to see the usual unshakable confidence, but instead, she saw the same shock and worry that had gripped her. The once imposing dressing room, with its polished elegance, suddenly felt stifling. "Oh God, what have I gotten myself into?" Emma thought, her hands trembling. Ava turned to her, her voice now trembling but laced with resolve. "Emma, it seems your first task as my representative just got a lot more complicated." Hours later, Ava adjusted the strap of Emma's worn-out bag on her shoulder, uncomfortable in the plain clothes she had chosen to represent her housekeeper. She paused at the mansion's door, taking one last look at the luxury she was about to leave behind. The driver, clearly confused by the unusual situation, waited patiently beside Emma's small car. "Remember, Ava, you are representing Emma. Do your best, just like she would," she murmured to herself, trying to steady her nerves. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the car, her posture stiff, betraying the privilege she had grown up with. The drive to the Bronx was a jarring contrast to her usual world, the streets becoming more crowded and the neighborhoods more modest as they neared Emma's home. Ava gazed out the window, taking in the crumbling buildings, cracked sidewalks, and tired faces of the people she passed. It was a reality she rarely saw up close, and it made her feel a mix of discomfort and admiration for Emma. How does Emma make this trip every day? Ava wondered, a newfound respect for her housekeeper stirring inside her. "Ma'am, we've arrived," the driver said, pulling her from her thoughts. Ava stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, staring at the dilapidated building in front of her. She hesitated before walking inside, her mind racing as she prepared to meet Emma's mother. In the cramped, noisy elevator, Ava practiced how she would introduce herself. "I'm a friend of Emma's. I'm here to help for today," she repeated under her breath, trying to steel herself. When the elevator jolted to a stop, Ava stepped out with a deep breath and walked toward the apartment door. She inserted the key, and the lock clicked open, the sound echoing in the quiet hall. As the door swung open, she was met with a modest, clean apartment. The stark contrast to her mansion hit her like a wave of guilt. She had never truly considered the living conditions of her employee until now. "Emma, is that you, dear?" A weak voice called from the bedroom. Ava froze for a second, then forced herself to respond, "No, ma'am. I'm a friend of Emma. She asked me to come help today." She moved toward the bedroom, her heart racing with every step. She knew she was far out of her depth. Caring for a sick person was beyond anything she had ever experienced, but she was determined to do her best for Emma and her mother. As she entered the room, the sight of Emma's frail mother, hooked up to medical equipment, hit her with full force. "Oh heavens, will I be able to help?" Ava thought, her heart sinking. Ava stood frozen, feeling completely out of her depth. Just as panic began to rise in her chest, Emma's mother suddenly began coughing violently, her frail body convulsing with the effort. Ava stood motionless, her heart pounding as she realized she had no idea how to handle the situation. The sound of the coughs echoed in the room, and Ava's mind went blank, overwhelmed with the helplessness of the moment. Meanwhile, in the upscale district of the city, Emma was nervously adjusting the borrowed blazer as the elevator made its way up to the boardroom floor. Her heart raced in her chest, and she struggled to steady her breathing. As the doors opened, she found herself facing an elegant hallway, its walls adorned with photos of the company's products. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and felt the echo of her high heels on the marble floor. Stopping in front of the double doors of the boardroom, she gathered her courage and whispered to herself, "You can do this, Emma. Do it for your mother." The room fell silent as she entered, every pair of eyes turning to her. The board members, men and women in high-end suits, stared at her with expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion. Emma walked confidently toward the head of the table, the seat reserved for Ava, feeling the weight of every gaze. She placed a folder on the table and stood tall, trying to channel Ava's instructions about posture and confidence. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Emma Smith, Mrs. Lewis's personal representative," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. "Where is Ava?" asked a middle-aged man at the opposite end of the table, his tone blunt. Emma took a steadying breath, bracing herself for the battle that was about to unfold. She explained the situation, leaving out personal details, but emphasizing that Ava had specifically chosen her for the task. As she spoke, she noticed the skeptical glances being exchanged between the board members. She knew she had to act fast to earn their trust. "I know this is an unusual situation," Emma said, her voice gaining strength. "But I believe my perspective can bring new ideas to the challenges we're facing." "What perspective would that be?" asked a gray-haired woman, her tone bordering on sarcasm. Emma paused, deciding to change her approach. Rather than try to imitate Ava, she chose honesty. She acknowledged that she had worked behind the scenes for years, observing the company closely while collaborating with Ava. "I see things from a different angle," she said. "I don't just look at the numbers. I see the people behind them." She spoke about employees' concerns, inefficiencies she had noticed, and the opportunities for improvement she had observed. To her surprise, some of the board members leaned forward, intrigued. "Interesting," murmured a younger man. "I hadn't thought about it that way." Emma felt a flicker of hope. "Maybe I can contribute something new after all," she thought. The meeting continued, with Emma navigating through the topics that Ava had briefed her on. When she didn't know something, she was upfront about it, promising to follow up and get the necessary information. Her honesty and fresh perspective seemed to resonate with some of the board members. However, she still felt a certain hostility, especially from the man who had questioned Ava's absence at the beginning of the meeting. "Miss Smith," he interrupted during a discussion about the new product line. "Can you explain exactly why Mrs. Lewis thought it was appropriate to send a representative to such a crucial meeting?" The tension in the room thickened as all eyes turned to her. She knew her answer could either solidify her position or cause her to lose credibility. The silence stretched, and Emma took a deep breath, carefully considering her words. Mrs. Lewis believes that sometimes we need a different perspective to see solutions that might be right in front of us. Emma began, her voice steady. She paused, gathering the courage for the next part. Frankly, given the current state of the company, perhaps an unconventional approach is exactly what we need. The room fell silent. Some board members were visibly shocked, while others seemed offended. The man who had questioned her stood up slowly, his face red with anger. How dare you? You have no idea of the challenges we're facing here, he hissed. Emma's heart raced, but she held her ground. With all due respect, sir, I do, she said calmly. She then began outlining the issues she had observed over the years. Inefficiencies in production, low employee morale, and how these small problems were stacking up to impact the quality of the product and the company's reputation. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were firm and clear. Maybe I don't understand all the financial aspects, but I understand the people who make this company run every day, and I believe that's just as valuable. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, surprising both Emma and the man who had challenged her. The meeting continued, with Emma offering ideas that no one, not even Ava, had brought up before. She spoke about the possibility of creating a more affordable product line, suggesting it would not only broaden the customer base, but also improve the company's public image. When asked about the financial specifics, Emma was honest again, admitting she didn't have all the numbers but was more than willing to work with the financial team to provide them. What we're doing here is more than just selling cosmetics. We're selling confidence, self-esteem, and that should be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy, she said, her confidence growing. As she spoke, several board members, including some of the more skeptical ones, nodded thoughtfully. By the time the meeting neared its end, Emma felt a noticeable shift in the room. The initial wariness had given way to reluctant respect and even curiosity. She had not only survived the meeting, but also brought fresh ideas to the table. When the chairman announced the session's conclusion, Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, Miss Smith, the chairman said with a small smile, I must admit, I'm intrigued by your ideas. Perhaps Mrs. Lewis made the right choice in sending you today. Emma smiled, a wave of pride washing over her. Thank you, sir. I hope I've contributed in some way. As the board members began to file out, Emma gathered her papers, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Just then, she saw the man who had initially challenged her walking toward her. His expression was serious, but there was no longer any trace of hostility. Miss Smith, I have to admit, I underestimated you. Your ideas are quite intriguing. Still, I can't help but wonder why Ava really sent you to present what I'm hearing today, he said in a low voice, his gaze narrowing slightly. A shiver ran down Emma's spine. She knew she had navigated the meeting successfully, but it was clear this man suspected there was more to the story than she had revealed. And he wasn't entirely off the mark. I assure you, there's no hidden agenda, Emma responded, her voice steady despite the tension. Mrs. Lewis simply believes in giving everyone in the company a voice. The man stared at her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. We'll see, he murmured, before turning and leaving the room. Emma stood alone in the boardroom, her heart still racing. She had made it through the meeting and even managed to impress a few board members. But now a new challenge awaited, keeping up the charade and dealing with mounting suspicions. As she left the room, a thought lingered in her mind. What will Ava say when she finds out what happened today? And how am I going to explain all of this to her? Meanwhile, Ava was facing her own crisis across the city. Panic rose in her chest as her mother's coughing grew worse. Without hesitation, Ava rushed to her side, trying to support the frail woman and calm her down. Breathe slowly, please, she urged, her voice trembling, but nothing seemed to help. Ava watched in horror as her mother's face grew paler, each breath a struggle. In a moment of clarity, Ava realized she needed professional help. Fast. Hold on, I'm calling an ambulance, she said, her voice sounding stronger than she felt as she dialed the emergency number. One thought flashed through her mind. How does Emma handle this every single day? The next few minutes were a blur of frantic activity. Paramedics flooded into the apartment, asking rapid-fire questions that Ava could barely keep up with. She found herself fumbling through answers about medications and medical history, painfully aware of how little she knew about her employee's mother's health. As the paramedics carefully moved the elderly woman onto the stretcher, Ava was overcome with guilt for not asking more about her life all these years. "How can I not know more? Can I come with her?" Ava asked, her voice nearly pleading. The paramedic nodded quickly. "Yes, but we need to leave now. She needs urgent care." The ride to the public hospital felt surreal. The ambulance, with its beeping monitors and sterile equipment, was a completely unfamiliar world to Ava. She held Emma's mother's hand tightly, murmuring words of comfort that didn't feel real, even as tears welled in her eyes. With every glance at the questions she was asked, Ava felt more lost. How do I explain that I'm here with someone I barely know? The hours that followed were humbling. Ava faced endless paperwork, long lines, and an overwhelmed staff. Every passing minute left her feeling more powerless and frustrated. Finally, when she met with the doctor, the news wasn't good. "The woman you're with needs an innovative treatment. It's expensive and not covered by her insurance," the doctor said, his voice grave. Ava's heart sank. "How much?" she asked, barely able to form the words. "There must be something we can do." The doctor quoted a price that made Ava gasp. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been an issue, but in that moment, she realized she'd left all her credit cards with Emma. Desperate, she pulled out her phone and tried calling Emma, but it went straight to voicemail. She's probably in the board meeting. What now? Ava thought, feeling the panic creeping back in. At that moment, a nurse appeared, urgency in her voice. "Her condition is worsening. We need a decision on the treatment now." Ava looked from the doctor to the nurse, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She couldn't reach Emma, and now, the woman's life seemed to rest in her hands. For the first time in a long time, Ava Lewis, the powerful CEO, felt completely powerless. "Please, there has to be something I can do," she whispered more to herself than to anyone else. As the medical staff waited for her response, Ava realized she was facing one of the toughest decisions of her life. Time was running out. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her racing thoughts. When she opened them again, there was a resolve in her eyes. "Start the treatment. I'll take full responsibility for the costs," she said firmly. The doctor and nurse exchanged uncertain looks, but Ava didn't waver. "I may not look it, but I assure you, I have the means. Please save her." "All right, but we'll need some form of guarantee soon," the doctor agreed reluctantly. Ava knew she had to figure everything out and could only hope things were going better for Emma. Back at the office, after the tense board meeting, Emma had barely caught her breath before she was informed about an urgent interview. The atmosphere at Lewis Cosmetics headquarters was chaotic, employees rushing around, phones constantly ringing. Emma was quickly ushered into a conference room where a team of journalists was waiting. "Remember, be firm but empathetic. This is a crisis situation," the press advisor whispered as they adjusted her microphone. Emma nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "Ava, trust me. I can't let her down now." The lights came on, and Emma found herself facing a journalist who wore a stern expression. "We're live with Emma Smith, representative of Lewis Cosmetics," the journalist began. "Miss Smith, how is the company responding to the serious allegations of animal testing that surfaced today?" Emma felt every eye in the room on her, waiting for her answer. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice steady and clear. "Lewis Cosmetics has always held itself to the highest ethical standards. We take these allegations seriously and are conducting a thorough internal investigation." The journalist wasted no time, quickly bringing up claims from internal sources that upper management was aware of the tests. "How do you explain that?" she pressed. Emma felt a wave of panic, but fought to remain composed. She thought about her years in the company, all the conversations she had overheard, and the things she had learned. As someone who has worked closely with the company's manager for a long time, I can confidently say she was unaware of any such practices, Emma replied, her voice calm. "The employees here are deeply committed to ethics and sustainability." "That's an interesting response," the journalist remarked, but quickly moved on. Which brings us to another question. Why isn't Mrs. Lewis here herself to address these accusations? Emma swallowed hard, remembering the sensitive situation Ava was dealing with. Mrs. Lewis is currently dealing with an urgent personal emergency. She has complete trust in her team to handle this situation with both transparency and integrity, Emma explained. The interview continued, with Emma deftly answering questions about the company's practices, sustainability efforts, and future direction. She was surprised at how much she knew, having spent years observing and listening from behind the scenes while Ava handled the bulk of the work. As the journalist seemed to run out of difficult questions, Emma started to relax. Maybe I'm doing better than I thought, she thought, allowing herself a brief, relieved smile. But just as quickly as it appeared, her sense of relief vanished. The journalist fixed her with a direct gaze and asked, "One last question, Miss Smith. How does Mrs. Lewis explain the 2010 incident involving her former company and similar accusations of unethical practices?" Emma felt her blood run cold. She had no idea what the journalist was referring to. Her mind raced, desperately trying to recall anything about Ava's past, but it was a blank. The room fell silent as everyone waited for her to respond. Oh God, how am I going to get out of this? Emma thought, feeling panic rise in her chest. The journalist's smile widened, sensing she had cornered her. "So, Miss Smith, the public is waiting for an answer." Time seemed to slow as Emma's mind raced, knowing that how she answered could impact not just this interview, but the entire reputation of the company. After taking a deep breath, she chose honesty. "I'm not familiar with the incident you're referring to," Emma began, her voice slightly shaky. "As Mrs. Lewis's representative, my focus is on the company's current and future practices, not past events that I cannot confirm or deny." The journalist raised an eyebrow, clearly dissatisfied with her response. "So, are you saying that Lewis Cosmetics keeps its representative in the dark about the company's history?" she asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. Emma felt a surge of determination. "No, what I'm saying is that our focus is on real, verifiable actions in the present." Taking advantage of the moment, she decided to steer the conversation in a new direction. "What I can tell you with certainty is that Lewis Cosmetics is fully committed to complete transparency. We're inviting journalists, activists, and regulatory authorities to visit our facilities and verify our processes themselves." With that, the journalist ended the interview, leaving Emma uncertain about how her responses would be received. As she left the room, she didn't have time to reflect because her phone buzzed with missed calls from Ava, sending her heart racing. "I hope she called to check in, to make sure everything's okay. I hope there's no problem with my mother," Emma thought anxiously. Meanwhile, Ava had just left the hospital, feeling exhausted and emotionally drained. Though Emma's mother was stable, the fear and helplessness Ava had felt still lingered in her body. She glanced at the clock and realized she was late for Emma's next commitment, cleaning a wealthy client's home on the Upper East Side. With no time to change or compose herself, Ava hailed a taxi, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. How does Emma do this every day? She wondered. Well, now you're about to find out, Ava murmured to herself, feeling her muscles protest as she sat back in the taxi. Upon arriving at the grand mansion, Ava hesitated for a moment before ringing the doorbell. The door was opened by an elegant middle-aged woman, who immediately frowned at the sight of Ava. "You're not Emma," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion. Ava swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "No, ma'am. I'm Ava, a colleague of Emma's. She had a family emergency and asked me to cover for her today." The response came more easily than Ava had expected, but the client's scrutinizing look made it clear that she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, come in then," the woman said reluctantly. "There's a lot to do, and we're already behind schedule." Ava nodded, thinking to herself, if I can run a multi-million-dollar company, surely I can clean a house, right? But reality quickly proved far different from Ava's expectations. She found herself struggling with a vacuum cleaner, confused by the various cleaning products, and completely unsure of the right order for tasks. The client watched her like a hawk, offering critical comments every few minutes. Emma never leaves streaks on the mirrors, or Emma always knows exactly how to arrange the cushions. Ava felt sweat running down her back, a mix of physical exertion and mounting anxiety. How does Emma stay so calm under this constant scrutiny? Ava wondered, doing her best not to show her frustration. Maybe because she actually knows what she's doing? Her mind responded sarcastically. The hours dragged on, and Ava could feel every muscle in her body protesting against the work she wasn't accustomed to. She knocked over a vase, thankfully it was empty, accidentally mixed colored and white laundry, and nearly broke a ridiculously expensive ornament with each mistake. The client's gaze grew colder, more distrustful with every blunder. Finally, the woman spoke sharply. "Ava," she said, her tone now laced with irritation, "I'm starting to doubt that you really work with Emma. Your incompetence is shocking." Ava felt the panic rising again. "Ma'am, I assure you, I'm new to this, but I'm doing my best." The client crossed her arms, her gaze cutting. "Well, your best clearly isn't good enough. I think I'll call the agency to verify your story. Emma has never let me down like this before." The client muttered as she picked up the phone, her fingers hovering over the buttons. Ava felt her heart race, realizing her cover was about to be blown. "Wait, please," Ava said desperately, her mind spinning for a way out. But the client was already dialing, and Ava knew it was only a matter of seconds before everything unraveled. In a final act of desperation, Ava decided to play her last card. With a voice that trembled but remained determined, she said, "Ma'am, please, I beg you not to call. The truth is, Emma is going through a very difficult time with her mother in the hospital. She asked me to come here because she didn't want to disappoint you. And as her friend, I couldn't say no." Ava paused, her heart pounding as she saw the client's expression soften ever so slightly. "I know I'm not up to Emma's standards, but I'm really trying my best. If you could just be patient with me, I promise I'll do better." Her voice quivered slightly as she added, "Emma always speaks so highly of you, about how understanding and kind you are. Please don't let her down now when she needs you the most." The client hesitated, still holding the phone, but after a tense moment, she slowly placed it back on the receiver. "All right," she said, her voice softer now. "I'll give you one more chance, but I expect to see some significant improvement. Understood?" Ava nodded vigorously, relief flooding her. "Thank you, ma'am. You won't regret it." As she picked up the cleaning supplies again, she made a mental note to thank Emma for her patience and understanding. "Once all of this is over, I'll never underestimate the work of cleaning again," Ava thought, now truly appreciating what Emma did every day. Meanwhile, Emma arrived at the mansion feeling physically and emotionally drained after an intense day. As she entered, she found Ava sitting on the sofa in the main living room, looking just as worn out. The two women locked eyes for a moment, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, it was Ava who broke the stillness, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Emma, I don't even know where to start." Emma slowly walked over and sat in the chair across from her. "Maybe from the beginning?" she suggested gently. "Mrs. Lewis, how's my mother?" "Your mother is stable now, Emma," Ava replied, guilt clear in her voice. "But it was close. I never imagined it would be this hard." Emma nodded, unspoken tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for taking care of her. I don't know what would have happened if—" She trailed off, her voice breaking. Ava abruptly stood and walked over to the window, her gaze distant. "Emma, I completely underestimated your life, your work, everything. The way you handle all of this every single day, it's extraordinary." She turned back to face Emma, a newfound admiration in her eyes. "And you? How was your day?" "In my shoes?" Emma took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts before speaking. "It was intense, Mrs. Lewis. The board meeting, the interview. I think I may have made a few mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" Ava asked, her voice tight. Emma went on to recount the day's events, including her commitment to transparency during the interview. As she spoke, she saw Ava's expression shift from surprise to concern, and, to her surprise, a hint of admiration. "Emma," Ava said quietly, "you may have saved the company today. Your honest and straightforward approach was exactly what we needed in this moment of crisis. A mix of relief and pride washed over Emma, but it was quickly replaced by concern. But what about the animal testing, Mrs. Lewis? Were the accusations true? Ava looked away, guilt heavy on her face. I didn't know, Emma. I swear I didn't know. A heavy silence filled the room as both women lost themselves in their thoughts. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice firm. Then we have to do the right thing, don't we? We need to keep the promises I made. Ava nodded slowly, her eyes now filled with a new determination. Yes, you're absolutely right. We'll do this together, Emma. Your perspective is exactly what this company needs. As they began discussing their next steps, Ava's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she hung up, her face a mix of surprise and concern. That was my assistant. Apparently, your statements about transparency and social responsibility caused our stock to skyrocket. Investors are excited about the new direction we're heading in. Emma blinked, stunned. That's good, right? Ava nodded slowly. Yes, but it also means we now have to deliver on every promise you made. There was a pause before Ava added, and there's more. The client you normally work for called. She wants to hire you permanently. Apparently, my honesty impressed her. The two women exchanged a look, the reality of their actions beginning to sink in. They had set out on this experiment to gain a new perspective, but now it was clear that they had set off a chain of events that would forever change both their lives and the company. What do we do now, Mrs. Lewis? Emma asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. Ava took a deep breath and gave a determined smile. Emma, she began, her voice firm but gentle. I want you to join the executive team at Lewis Cosmetics. Emma blinked, certain she had misheard. Ava continued, your unique perspective, your integrity, and your ability to think quickly under pressure are exactly what we need to move this company forward. A wave of emotions hit Emma. Excitement, fear, disbelief. But it was the fear that won out. But Mrs. Lewis, I don't have any formal business training. I'm just a... Don't underestimate yourself. Ava interrupted, her voice unwavering. You saved this company today, and more importantly, you showed me a new way to lead. Emma fell silent for a moment, taking in what Ava had just said. What if I'm not capable? She whispered, voicing her deepest fear. You are capable. Emma, Ava reassured her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I wouldn't offer you this if I didn't believe in you. I'll be with you every step of the way. In the days that followed, Emma found herself swept up in a whirlwind of change. She accepted Ava's offer, and together, they began to implement the promises of transparency and social responsibility, pushing the company in a new, bold direction. Emma brought a fresh, unique perspective to every meeting, challenging the traditional ways of doing things and suggesting creative solutions. Naturally, there was some resistance, but Emma's resolve, paired with Ava's steadfast support, gradually began to transform the company's culture. You're changing this company, Emma, Ava remarked one day, watching Emma confidently lead a presentation to the investors. Emma smiled, feeling a newfound confidence she hadn't imagined possible. We're changing this company, Mrs. Lewis. Together, under the new leadership, the company thrived, and Emma's mother's health steadily improved, thanks to the treatment Ava had made possible. Emma balanced her growing responsibilities at the company with regular visits to the hospital, each visit bringing a mix of joy and gratitude as she witnessed her mother's recovery. One day, after leaving the hospital following a particularly encouraging visit, Emma received a message from Ava. Emergency meeting. Come immediately. Anxiety gripped her as she wondered what could possibly have gone wrong. But when she arrived at the office, Emma was met not with a crisis, but with a celebration. The conference room was festively decorated, and the entire executive team was gathered, including Ava, who greeted her with a broad smile. Emma, Ava announced, we just received the results from the first quarter since implementing our changes. Our sales have increased by 30%, and we've been named one of the most ethical companies of the year. The room erupted in applause, and Emma's eyes welled up with tears of pride. She looked at Ava, no longer just her boss, but a true partner and friend. We did it, Mrs. Lewis, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. Ava smiled warmly, placing her hand on Emma's shoulder. Yes, we did. And please call me Ava. In the months that followed, Emma and Ava continued working side by side, each bringing her own strengths to the partnership. Emma never lost her ability to empathize with employees at every level, frequently walking the factory floor and listening to their concerns. Ava, in turn, never underestimated the value of Emma's perspective, always seeking her advice on major decisions. One night, as they shared a late coffee in the office, Ava chuckled softly. You know, Emma, I used to think your life was easier than mine. What a foolish thought. Emma smiled and replied, I used to think the same about you, Ava. I guess we both learn a lot. Looking out the window at the glittering city lights, Emma reflected on the incredible journey they had taken. What started as a simple role swap had transformed not only their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. The company was thriving, Emma's mother was healthy, and they had found a friendship and partnership neither of them had expected. Who would have thought that one day of chaos could lead to all of this? Emma thought to herself. Beside her, Ava seemed to read her mind. Here's to change, Emma, she said, raising her cup in a toast, and to never underestimating the power of a fresh perspective. As they gazed out at the city from the office, both Emma and Ava reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. What had begun as a spontaneous experiment, swapping roles for a day, had turned into a powerful partnership, one that not only transformed their lives but also redefined the future of Lewis Cosmetics. Through it all, they learned that while someone else's life may appear easier or better from the outside, every experience has its own lessons. The empathy, understanding, and mutual respect they had developed not only saved the company, but forged an unlikely and lasting friendship. Together, they proved that true leadership is born from a place of understanding and respect.